how have you seen over the many years that you've been in the business, how IP in Southeast Asia has developed?
Very good in the sense that the awareness has gone deeper. Of course, there are still some companies that are not as savvy as others, but increasingly, I think through the initiatives in Singapore, whether it's through us with the research groups, A-Star and all that, also with the IP Academy championing IP education at 2 levels in Singapore, thought leadership as well as executive education. So I think these are the initiatives that will spearhead Singapore and also along with that the region to appreciate and understand the impact that IP has on the future economy.
Well, give us a flavour of that, because clearly, while Singapore is a well-known economy, it's not the largest, it's the 4th largest, and other markets in the region have also developed, obviously, over that time. So what's been your assessment as, I guess, those global trends in terms of where Southeast Asia is now?
I think we see ourselves as the go-to place in terms of IP. We position ourselves as the IP hub of Asia. Of course, there are other areas where I think that's important too. What has helped most in trying to spearhead IP for us is the whole of government approach towards intellectual property. And in that sense, whether it's innovation and research approach or whether it's the legal infrastructure, all aspects of the government is aligned towards this commonality in terms of innovation and enterprise, and IP being undergirding all of that.
And IP, particularly for Singapore, is so important because clearly other countries can manufacture much cheaper.
That's right.
Singapore's often the place where R&D centres are located, and therefore obviously IP is important.
Higher value add.
Indeed, but at the same time, setting regulations and creating frameworks is one thing. Actually having a cultural shift towards IP respect and what we talk about here at IPBC,
yes,
the trading of IP, is quite another thing altogether. So where do you see the gaps and the areas for development in Southeast Asia?
I think the moment most companies now understand that the market in Singapore is small, they go worldwide. Where else can they protect their intellectual property? That's important because if the market is small in Singapore, yes, you could create the IP in Singapore. Where else do you go with the IP that you would then have to protect so that your product becomes more competitive in those countries, in those markets?
But we're not really seeing a vibrant trading market, secondary market.
Secondary market will take some time. What I find is important is that the banks and the financial institutions should have that understanding of what IP is and can do. And until that takes place, it's not going to be as fast as, say, the North American market or even Europe, Japan.
Ironically, it is some of these developments in fintech,
yes,
which might actually delay, I would say, that sort of development, isn't it? Because we're seeing fewer and fewer people employed in banking as technology takes over traditional banking roles.
Fintech is interesting. I mean, right across from where A-Star is in Ayer Rajah, there is that community, we call it the Launchpad, A-Star Central. That's where a lot of the startups are taking shape. And through that kind of environment, we hope that the technologies that are applied for fintech will come into place along with other forms of technology.
A lot of the fintechs are actually started by bankers. That's I guess, the other thing.
That's interesting too.
Internal bankers. Yeah.
Internal bankers who understand that, there are models, there are business models in the fintech era that's useful. And I think as a financial, we always talk about Singapore being the hub of many things, and finance is another one of them. So with the banks and areas to position Singapore as the financial hub of sorts, and I think that fintech will come in handy.
So are you seeing that fintech is accelerating that necessary understanding that you're talking about?
Very much so. It will take some time. I think we have interested parties all over asking about what Singapore is like, where would they go if they have a business model in the fintech area. Although I'm not an expert in fintech, I'm more in the science and technology area, so I am not the best person to ask on this.
Okay, but clearly the area of IP is important.
Right.
As we finally then swing around to IPBC Southeast Asia in Singapore early March,
yes,
what sort of topics do you think people in the IP business will be hotly discussing at that event?
The multinationals they understand IP. I think what's important is to get the small and medium-sized enterprise and the startup companies having a better understanding of what IP can and cannot do. One of the things that we always are concerned with is that IP creation, right, inventorship, ownership, these are separate concepts that companies that are not so savvy in IP should understand. Because once they have a clarity as to, like, I can exploit the IP, but I don't have to be an owner of it. The ownership of IP comes with incredible responsibility and cost. So in many ways, when we look at us as ETPL, licensing technology, it is important that we put across to the potential licensees that owning the IP is just one aspect of it. You as a licensee, if you take it from us, you can position your company to leverage on all that is needed for your product to incorporate the IP that will help your product be more globally competitive, yet not owning it and managing the background IP with the various vendors that deals with the IP. We take on that role.
Yes, but at the same time, the government has thrown all sorts of money through schemes to help SMEs acquire IP, license the IP.
That's right.
I can't say there's a great deal of take-up. There seems to be still a lot of education that's required.
Education is one thing, and this is one area that I think within A-Star we're looking at co-innovating with companies, because in the process of problem statement, identifying the kind of issues that the companies may have in terms of addressing problems in the technology, we can work together from the beginning, co-innovate and develop things that are needed by the companies. And we've started some initiative where, for example, the Diagnostic Development Hub, my colleague Dr. Sydney Yee is here. She heads that DXD. It's a national initiative that looks at identifying clinicians' problem with medical devices or medical solutions, working with us to bundle the technologies across the whole of Singapore, and then working with third-party co-development partners to then develop the necessary productization of the technologies for the industry needs. It's a technology pool that we're looking at.
And it's one that we'll jump into at IPBC Southeast Asia.
That's right.
In Singapore in early March. Cheng Huat,
right.
Thank you so much for coming in today.
Pleasure.
From A-Star here at IPBC Asia 2016 in Shanghai. Good, thank you.